This video will define and explain the term market, as well as define and explain demand and the law of demand. It will also show you how to draw a demand curve. So before we start explaining what demand is, we have to first become familiar with the term market. What is a market? Well, basically a market is a place where buyers and sellers meet. The sellers have a specific good or service that they want to sell, and the buyers have money. So a market is a place where buyers and sellers meet to exchange goods or services for money. Now remember, a market does not have to be a physical place. It can be a virtual online space. So we've got Amazon, we've got eBay. Markets don't actually have to be physical places where buyers and sellers go to physically. So let's take a look at the buyer's side of the market. The buyers are the ones that demand the product. So the demand comes from the buyers. What's the meaning of this word demand? Well, basically, demand is the quantity of a good or service that consumers or buyers are willing and able to purchase at a given price in a given time period. So to look at demand, you have to look at a certain price, a given price, over a certain time period and see how much of that good or service that the buyers are both willing and able. It's not enough to just want the product, to be willing to buy it. You have to actually be able to buy it. So Mr. Mo, for example, he wants a Porsche, but I am not part of the demand for Porsche because I surely cannot afford to purchase a Porsche. I'm not able to buy a Porsche. So demand has to actually be effective demand. This is what economists call it. Effective demand is demand where the consumers or the buyers are both willing and able to buy the product at a certain price or a given price in a given time period. So, what's the law of demand, or what is this whole demand theory about? Well, basically, the law of demand states that ceteris paribus, which means other things held constant, as the price of a product falls, the quantity demanded of that product will usually increase. So, ceteris paribus, as price falls, quantity demanded will increase. As price rises, quantity demanded will fall. Both of these conditions, it's important to hold the assumption of ceteris paribus, which means other things held constant. So why is the relationship between price and quantity demanded as such? Why is the law of demand as such? Well, basically, economists will say that this is down to two things: the income effect and the substitution effect. Remember how I said the law of demand assumes that other things are held constant. It assumes ceteris paribus. So one of the things that's held constant is income. If we hold income constant, if the price of a product rises, and because we assume that income is held constant, naturally consumers will buy less of that product, right? Because their income hasn't changed. So that's one way of explaining it. And the opposite is true. If price falls and income is held constant, naturally we will assume that consumers can afford to purchase more. Another way of explaining the law of demand is the substitution effect. Because we assume other things are held constant, that includes the prices of substitutes. So if you have a look at Coca-Cola and Pepsi, for example, if the price of Coca-Cola rises, we assume, because in the law of demand we assume ceteris paribus, we assume the price of Pepsi hasn't changed. So naturally, now that Coca-Cola is more expensive, consumers will switch to a close substitute. So, because they will switch and purchase more Pepsi, the quantity demanded for Coca-Cola will naturally fall. And the opposite is true. If the price of Coca-Cola falls and the price of Pepsi remains the same, people will buy more Coca-Cola because they will substitute. They will buy more Coca-Cola instead of Pepsi. So the income effect and the substitution effect both explain why price and quantity demanded are inversely related. So how is the law of demand represented or illustrated visually? Well, basically, this is done through the demand curve. I have drawn here a demand curve for soft drinks. So we're looking at the market for soft drinks. Because we know price and quantity are negatively related, or they're inversely related, when price rises, quantity demanded will fall, and the opposite is true. When price falls, quantity demanded will increase. And this is what the demand curve looks like. Now we know that when there is a change in price, this will cause a movement along the demand curve, which will result in changes in quantity demanded. It's very important to use these terms. Changes in price, so price rises or price falls. We know that when price rises, quantity demanded will decrease. When price falls, quantity demanded will increase. And these are represented through movements along the demand curve. So changes in price cause movements along the demand curve from one point to the other. Now, there is a difference between individual demand for a product and market demand, and it's a pretty easy difference to understand. Basically, market demand is the sum of all individual demands for a good or service. It's the total quantity demanded by all consumers in that market. So basically, if you know that there are 10 consumers in the market, and you know the quantity demanded of each consumer at a given price, at that given price, just add the total quantity demanded of all the 10 consumers, and that would give you the market demand at that price. Now, if you do the same for each price, so at all other prices at a given price, look at what the total quantity demanded is, that can help you plot or draw the market demand curve.